So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Áine, and so I'm just going to go through a very short bio to give you the background on their work. So Aoife Gallagher is an associate professor in speech and language therapy at the School of Adult Health in the area of developmental speech, language and communication needs. Aoife's research expertise includes participatory methods and implementation science, and she employs a rights-based approach in her research to advance the inclusion and participation of children's speech, language and communication needs in society. So, Dr. Áine Kearns beside her. Áine has worked with a variety of clinical populations across the lifespan in a range of health and education settings. She's an associate professor in the School of Adult Health, teaching on the MSc Speech and Language Therapy program, and is course director for the Professional Diploma in Intermediary Studies. Her research interests include acquired communication disabilities, as well as accessible communication and its role in the justice system. So the third presenter is unfortunately not here, but that's Dr. Aine Cusack. He's associate professor in the School of Law and is currently at the Cusack.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks very much for that introduction, Julie, and we're delighted to be able to share our work with everyone today, so thank you for listening. I'm going to start with a story to set the scene for our work. So, on a very cold night in 1952 in London town, this man, Derek Bentley, decided to rob a warehouse. He decided to do this with his friend, Chris Craig, who was 16 at the time. While they were robbing the warehouse, someone called the police and the police turned up. And the police looked at Chris Craig and they knew he had a gun, so they said, "Chris, can you hand us the gun, lad?" they said. And what happened next, and what Derek Bentley, this man here in the photo, said, ended up being the critical evidence in a criminal case. And he ended up, unfortunately, being the last man to be hanged in London, Wandsworth Prison, in 1958, following an unsuccessful appeal. The evidence was around the language, what he had said at that time at the scene. What later transpired is that he in fact had an intellectual disability. The prosecution's case was, and this is a song that Elvis Costello wrote about the case later, and there's a film about it as well. Derek Bentley said, when the police said to Chris Craig, "Give us the gun," Derek Bentley said, "Let him have it, Chris." That utterance has two meanings. One is literal, give them the gun, Chris, don't do anything daft. And let them have it, shoot them. Chris Craig shot the police officer and it was a criminal case. Derek Bentley was hanged for aiding and abetting. Chris Craig wasn't, he was only 16, so he was a child. Why do we raise this case? Because we want to show you the high stakes involved when language is misinterpreted in the context of the legal process. And that brings us on to our focus of our talk today, which is all around this role, the role of the intermediary. It's a very innovative role. It's quite new. It's not in every country at the moment. It's been described as revolutionary, radical, and that's because the intermediary has power in a very powerful system. They are actually allowed, as communication experts, to intervene and interrupt communication in court. So they're allowed to tell barristers and judges how communication should happen. So as you can imagine, it doesn't go down well with everybody. We're quite new to the role in Ireland. The role is to do with being an officer of the court. It's nothing to do with being an advocate. You're there to give a recommendation around how communication should happen between a vulnerable witness or defendant and how they should be cross-examined in terms of communication. It's underpinned by the principle of best evidence. So the idea is the intermediary actually is there to ensure reliable oral testimony. Why is it so important? We don't have a lot of time to go into prevalence data, but the figures are very, very stark. So if you collect data within justice settings, the proportion of people with speech and language needs is phenomenally high. Around 80% of adult prisoners have a speech and language need. Unfortunately, about 5% of those needs are identified before that person engages with the justice system. So that means that a lot of people currently in prison either didn't understand what happened when they engaged with the system, or were unable to participate fully and reliably in the process. So it's a really stark situation. Here's some quotes from young people who've been in a situation like this and have a speech and language need. The reason why we've drawn on these quotes is we're trying to tease out and tell people that it's not just the vocabulary or the complexity of a sentence that's at play, it's what happens to communication in that context, in that adversarial context. And what we know of young people is they will tell people what they think they want to hear to get out of the situation. These quotes, just to source them from a study in New Zealand and also a report by Ursula Kelly in the context of the Irish system as well. So our goals then as a team are to advance the role of the intermediary in the Irish context, and we take three features to our work. It has to be interdisciplinary because it needs communication science, but it needs it in the context of legal law of evidence and all of those kinds of things. So that's where myself, Áine and Áine come in. It has to be engaged because there's so many diverse stakeholders involved, and we know if we're going to implement the role in advance that we have to engage those people. We have to build networks around this role. And we have an implementation orientation because it's really complicated what we're trying to do. The role itself is poorly defined. There isn't agreement about the conceptualization of the role, and that's before you start on the contextual factors that are going to influence implementation for us. We've had three main research strands to our work: excellence in pedagogy, and developing an understanding of the role and building networks. I'm actually going to hand over to Áine now to talk about a couple of these, and I'll come back and talk to you about the network activities after that.
Thank you. So, we actually were very progressive as a country in setting out legislation to include the intermediary facility as a special measure for vulnerable witnesses and complainants in the Criminal Evidence Act in 1992. We were ahead of England and Wales in that regard, but actually we had this long time frame before we actually had an intermediary set foot. Or as it was initially, also there was a virtual role in 2015 where we had intermediaries from both England and also from Northern Ireland acting in cases in our courts. So there was a recognition that this role was an important role in terms of special measures, but really what we're seeing, so EFA has identified that when it comes to defendants and vulnerable suspects, that there is a clear need for intermediaries. There's also been this recognised role for intermediaries with vulnerable witnesses and complainants, particularly children and those who might have intellectual disabilities. But what we see as well in the Malley report in 2020 is a recommendation around how we need to support vulnerable witnesses. And here we see recommendations around introducing intermediaries and intermediary training in the Irish context. And that's followed up then by the Supporting a Victim's Journey from the Minister for Justice in 2021, with those recommendations for that training of intermediaries to be enacted within an Irish higher education institution. And we in UL, we were very fortunate, we followed up on the expression of interest in 2021, and we designed the Professional Diploma in Intermediary Studies. We are the first and only higher education institution in the world that provides an interfaculty training program for intermediaries. Even though we know we have intermediaries in over 13 countries, we are actually the first country that does this as a higher education qualification. And we opened our doors to students coming in 2022. We've had 2 graduating cohorts, and we have another group that are actually training at the moment. And the register for intermediaries was actually set up in April 2024, and that's hosted by the court services. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So we set out within our training program, we set out to consider the pedagogy, to consider our teaching approaches, to make sure that we have a holistic curriculum for our students as well. It is an interfaculty programme, so our students undertake modules from the School of Law, and they learn about law of evidence and advanced crime and justice, and they're online programmes, and then they have a blended programme, blended modules with us in the springtime, which really gets in depth with the role of the intermediary. And the people who come onto the programme are qualified speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, and social workers who already have communication expertise skills or who are already working with vulnerable populations and have an understanding about some of the challenges that those populations might be facing. And we provide a wide range of topics that they engage with throughout the programme. So I've already mentioned law of evidence, crime and criminal justice processes, the statutory instruments that are available, those special measures, they explore these, what else is out there other than the intermediary. There are other things that are available in Irish courts and how they can work together with that. We look at intermediary practice around the globe. We look at the vulnerable populations they may be engaging with, their roles and responsibilities, understanding about accessible and inclusive communication within a court context, and really embedding reflective practice throughout, because we know from literature that actually this new identity coming from their health and social care background into this new context can actually be a little bit challenging as well. And so we really encourage that reflective practice. And this really comes together. We use a range of different teaching strategies, and this is culminated then in their court simulation. You can just see the quotes here from two of our former students who have identified that that's really where it all comes together for them in that learning process. And we have been learning of this journey as well, and we've been understanding about the role from others outside of our jurisdiction. So Aoife and Alan and I came together with some registered intermediaries in Northern Ireland and also some communication assistants, that's the term that's used for the same role out in New Zealand. And we wrote a paper around sharing learning, because we are all learning through this process. It is a relatively new profession. And that has helped us to kind of build some of those connections as well and identify some of those similar challenges. And we have also explored, we have also explored the role and how it is perceived by stakeholders within the justice system through qualitative synthesis that we carried out with students on the speech and language therapy programme as part of their final year project. This was recently published, and we reviewed all literature, empirical and theoretical literature that explored the role of the intermediary justice system. We included 26 papers in this qualitative synthesis, and we identified 7 categories that really kind of describe the tension and the conflict that's there within the role. So even things like, for example, outer strengths, inner conflicts. So there is this piece around the intermediaries in this new context, it's justice context. They're often advocating for themselves, for their clients, although they're not advocates per se, but they're looking to make sure that they can provide that equal access to justice for everyone. And they're trying to get that role understood, but they also have these feelings of doubt, failure, maybe regret about some of the things that they might, in terms of having to take on cases that they're questioning, do they have those skills? There is a lot of challenges and tensions within this role. And I'm going to hand you back to Aoife to talk about some of the other research that we've been looking at.
Oh, Antonia. And so we've been doing a lot of work with them around building networks. So just an example of some of that. Last summer we were grateful to receive funding from EHS, which is naturally by the Department of Justice, to hold a knowledge exchange event, which was opened by Shane McCombs, who himself has done significant work in this space previously, and the Minister for Justice. And that led to we did an exercise within that, I suppose, to identify stakeholder priorities. And we have identified 6 stakeholder priorities in that, and that is now influencing a north-south application with colleagues John Taggart and others in Queens to continue to build that network, hopefully. Áine, do you want to say about your...
Yeah, so, and I've just been funded for a Research Ireland New Foundations award, which is going to be engaging as civic society partner. That's actually the accompaniment support services for children that work with children and families who are navigating the justice system. They've actually been quite good champions for intermediary role as well, and we are looking to come together to try to have collaborative learning and knowledge exchange around the challenges that are currently facing the justice system in terms of trying to ensure child-friendly justice services. So that's something that we're working on this year.
We've also been building our network across Europe. So between the three of us, we're committee members for 2 cost actions around youth justice or language and communication and justice. And so we've had a great opportunity there to build our network and to influence some of the thinking at a European level by contributing, for example, to training schools and work packages over a variety of lovely locations along the way. Áine, I'll hand back to you around.
So, you know, these are the photos where we stand in and we're like, smile, as we were talking about earlier. But these were very proud days for us in terms of seeing some of our graduates come to the end of the programme. We have 35 graduates. We're a small programme, but we have 35 graduates over the last 2 years, and we have 20 students in the current cohort. And they are going on to act as intermediaries. And the register, there was a bit of to and froing in terms of getting the register up and running, but it opened in April 2024. Aoife Gallagher and I have been heavily involved in the setting up of that. We were involved in the development of the practice guidelines manuals for the intermediaries and kind of support resources as well. So it's great to finally see that up and running, and intermediaries are starting to take cases. Previously, as I said, they had always been supported by intermediaries coming down from Northern Ireland, and really there was a huge capacity issue. They simply were having to prioritise the most drafted cases because there just wasn't enough there to support all of the cases that were coming through. And so now what we have at the moment is a pilot, and Aoife and I have been involved in discussions and planning with both the Office of the DPP and also the Department of Justice in terms of identifying what are the outcomes that we need to be looking at and the data that we need to be gathering for this pilot project. And as I said, that's ongoing at the moment, and we've been involved in that steering group. And I asked one of our past graduates who has just actually completed their first case in terms of their assessment and then also going to court with that individual, that young individual. And I thought it was just interesting, you know, they identified that, you know, it was a privilege and an honour for them to be able to ensure that equal access to justice. And I think that that's really the part as well that we want to capture. We know there is impact there. We want to capture that. We want to build on that. And bringing that forward. And we have, through our work, we've been making some strides in terms of national news, and we think this is, you know, kind of a good story in terms of for UL, for the programme. And we have also been involved with on the Claire Byrne show. So Alan was interviewed about the programme and about the intermediary role, and I think that's really important to see because it's such a new role. It's trying to build awareness. We identify that in the literature that is actually a big challenge. And when we started this, so I feel like I should point out that this was actually during COVID almost, and Aoife and I are like connecting back and forth in COVID, all online, and we set out going like, where are we pulling all this information from? And there was a report on intermediaries around the globe in 2020 has recently been updated. In 2020, there were 8 countries that had detailed information about intermediaries. And there was an understanding that it was available in 13 countries. We were included as the potentially having intermediaries, but no actual scheme. We're on the map. We are there now in terms of our scheme, our information, our training, and we are leading the way in terms of training and trying to build that research. And I think it is important to recognise that, and that's something that we feel very proud and privileged to be able to do as well. And I think that brings us to the end, unless there's anything else.